Robert Dawson, Linda Dawson, and their daughter Hannah appeared to be the perfect family in the quiet town of Brookhaven, but when Hannah uncovered a hidden truth about the people closest to her, she vanished without a trace. 3 weeks later, her body was found in the woods, and the investigation revealed a secret so dark it destroyed everything the Dawsons had built. This is the story of how one family's buried past turned into the secret that kills. The Dawson family lived in Brookhaven, a town that prided itself on being safe, quiet, and unchanging. People walked their dogs in the evenings, children rode their bikes in cul-de-sacs, and families waved to each other as they watered their gardens. Against this backdrop of calm predictability, Robert Dawson, his wife Linda, and their teenage daughter Hannah seemed like the perfect neighbors. Their two-story house was always freshly painted, the flower beds neatly trimmed, and the porch light glowed warmly every evening. To anyone passing by, the Dawsons were an image of stability. Robert Dawson worked as a successful real estate agent. He was always dressed sharply, shaking hands with confidence, and promising hopeful couples that their dream homes were waiting. His wife Linda poured her energy into the church, charity events, and school bake sales. She was known for her kindness and patience, a woman who always had time to listen. And then there was Hannah, just 17. A bright and ambitious student who filled her notebooks with plans for the future. She was popular without arrogance. It's the kind of girl others admired for her balance of hard work and gentle warmth. But in every community, appearances can deceive. Behind the neat hedges and spotless windows, the Dawson family carried unspoken tensions. Neighbors occasionally heard raised voices late at night, though the sounds were quickly silenced. Robert's long work hours often meant he missed dinners, and Hannah's friends quietly noticed that she sometimes looked distracted, her smile fading faster than it once had. It was easy to overlook these cracks when the picture seemed so perfect, but Hannah herself felt them deeply. On a chilly evening in early autumn, Brookhaven's quiet streets became the setting for a mystery that would shatter the image of the Dawsons forever. Hannah had been scheduled to attend a study group at her best friend's house. She left home wearing her backpack, waving briefly to her mother as she stepped out into the fading sunlight. But that evening, Hannah never returned. When midnight came and the lights inside the Dawson home burned bright, Linda's worry turned into panic. Calls went unanswered, texts showed no response, and friends reported that Hannah never showed up to the study session at all. By the next morning, her disappearance had consumed the town. Flyers were quickly made, neighbors volunteered to search, and the Dawsons appeared on local television pleading for her safe return. Linda's face looked pale and strained as she begged for anyone with information to step forward. Robert, standing beside her, appeared calm and collected, urging the community to stay hopeful. Some viewers admired his composure, while others quietly wondered how a father could appear so controlled at such a devastating time. Detectives began their investigation. Combing through Hannah's phone records and social media, the picture they found was not entirely what her parents expected. In the days before she vanished, Hannah had sent a series of anxious messages to a close friend. They were brief but unsettling, speaking of something she had discovered and her uncertainty about what to do with it. The tone of those messages grew more desperate as the day of her disappearance approached, ending abruptly with no reply after 6 p.m. Search parties scoured the woods and rivers around Brookhaven, while detectives began questioning Hannah's classmates. Rumors swirled quickly. Some claimed she had planned to run away. Others whispered about a secret boyfriend. But none of these stories explained the haunting silence left behind. For her mother, the uncertainty was unbearable. For her father, it was something he spoke of less, though his absence from some of the searches did not go unnoticed. The Dawson home, once a place of calm domestic life, became the center of speculation. Every glance at their drawn curtains seemed to hold weight, and every whispered conversation added to the unease spreading through the neighborhood. People had always thought of the Dawsons as untouchable in their perfection, but now the family was marked by a growing shadow, one tied directly to the secret Hannah carried with her into the night she disappeared. Detectives began peeling back the layers of Hannah's life with the precision of surgeons. knowing that somewhere in her routines and private world lay the answer to her sudden disappearance. Her bedroom, once considered a teenager's sanctuary filled with posters, school books, and photos, was carefully searched for overlooked details. It was there that they discovered something unusual. Behind a loose panel in her desk, tucked away, where no one would easily notice, was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. At first glance, the entry seemed ordinary, filled with descriptions of school days, friends, and dreams for the future. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew sharper. Words pressed heavily into the paper, as if written in fear or frustration. Hannah described overhearing late-night arguments between her parents, not about household chores or bills, but about things she could not fully understand. She wrote about hearing Robert on the phone, using a tone far colder than the cheerful voice he carried at work, discussing matters that involved threats, money, promises to people she did not know. The deeper the detectives read, the clearer it became that Hannah believed her father was hiding something. She did not write with certainty, but with suspicion. Piecing together fragments of overheard conversations and half-hidden documents she claimed to have seen in his office. She referred repeatedly to something terrible he did before we lived here, though she never wrote out the full details. In her final entries, Hannah admitted she was terrified that what she had discovered might not only ruin her family's image but also place her in danger. Investigators turned their attention to Robert Dawson's background, combing through records that stretched back years. On the surface, his history seemed clean, a hard-working man who rose steadily in the world of real estate. But when they dug deeper, they uncovered traces of a different past. Years earlier, before he came to Brookhaven, Robert had been known under a different name in another state. That name was tied to a financial scandal, one that had left several families bankrupt and desperate. Though no formal charges ever stuck, whispers of fraud and deceit clung to him. When the scandal collapsed, he vanished from public view, only to reappear years later with a new identity and a seemingly respectable career. This revelation stunned those who knew him. The man who had been praised for his honesty and dedication was suddenly painted in a darker light. If Hannah had stumbled upon this past, it could explain her fearful journal entries. Yet suspicion alone did not solve the case. Detectives wondered. If Hannah had confronted her father, or if perhaps someone else connected to his past had returned to silence her, phone records provided the next important clue. On the night Hannah disappeared, Robert's calls lasted far longer than usual, stretching late into the evening. Detectives noted his alibi, that he had been meeting with a client, but the timing left gaps. Meanwhile, Linda's statements added little clarity. She insisted she had been at home preparing for a church fundraiser, but neighbors reported seeing her pacing outside as though waiting for someone. Her anxiety seemed real, yet her behavior raised questions about what she knew. The discovery of Hannah's journal shifted the focus of the entire investigation. It was no longer about a missing girl alone, but about the possibility of a family hiding secrets. Detectives began to wonder whether Hannah's disappearance was the result of chance, or if it was directly tied to the hidden life her father had tried to bury. For the Dawson family, the journal's discovery was like a crack in glass spreading, quickly and uncontrollably. Robert's carefully crafted reputation began to unravel while Linda grew more withdrawn, appearing exhausted and pale. People in Brookhaven whispered more openly now. Some suggested Robert's past had finally caught up with him. Others speculated that Hannah had planned to expose him, only to vanish before she could. What remained certain was that the image of perfection surrounding the Dawsons was gone. In its place stood a house filled with suspicion, fear, and the unmistakable sense that Hannah's secret had pulled something dangerous to the surface. Weeks after Hannah vanished, Brookhaven's fragile calm shattered. Once more when hikers stumbled upon a discovery that would forever change the investigation. Deep in Brookhaven forests, beneath a rough covering of branches and leaves, they found human remains. The area was remote, miles away from walking trails, the kind of place someone would only reach with intention. When police arrived and carefully examined the site, the suspicion became reality. The body was Hannah Dawson. The scene was unsettling. The attempt to conceal her body was clumsy, suggesting panic rather than calculation. Forensic experts determined she had been killed the very night she disappeared. The blow that ended her life was forceful and deliberate, not an accident, but an act of violence. With her death confirmed, the case shifted from a desperate search for a missing teenager to a homicide. The discovery shook the community. Vigils were held, candles lined the sidewalks, and Hannah's smiling face, once seen on missing posters, now appeared on memorial boards. Neighbors cried openly, struggling to accept that the girl they had seen laughing and walking to school just weeks earlier had been found lifeless in the woods. The Dawson family stood in the center of it all, their grief playing out in public. Linda was visibly broken, clinging to her daughter's photograph, while Robert remained more controlled, his expressions read by some as strength and by others as detachment. Detectives, meanwhile, focused sharply on the details. The woods where Hannah was found were not random. Records showed Robert Dawson had sold several properties on the outskirts of that very forest. He knew the area well, raising uncomfortable questions. His alibi from the night Hannah disappeared was also reviewed with fresh urgency. Phone logs placed him across town, but the timing left gaps long enough for him to have driven to the woods. The more investigators examined his movements, the less certainty they felt about his innocence. Still, there were other leads. Hannah's journal entries mentioned someone she referred to only as the Shadow. She wrote about a figure who lingered too close, someone who seemed to know her fears. Detectives believed this mysterious person might hold the key to the case. Interviews with friends and classmates produced no clear suspect, but one detail stood out. Hannah had spoken to a teacher weeks before her disappearance, hinting that she had information about her family that could destroy everything. She never explained further. The medical examiner's report deepened the puzzle. There were no signs of prolonged struggle, no defensive wounds beyond the fatal injury. It suggested Hannah may have known her killer, trusted them enough not to resist until it was too late. This pointed back toward the people closest to her. The tension between Robert and Linda became more visible during questioning. Linda's exhaustion seemed genuine, but her vague answers about the night Hannah disappeared kept suspicion alive. Some investigators began to wonder if she had discovered her husband's past as well and had chosen silence over truth. Attention also turned to Robert's professional life. Clients and co-workers were interviewed, and while many spoke highly of him, few described moments where his charm cracked, revealing flashes of temper. Old contacts from the state where he once lived painted a darker picture. He spoke of lies, lost savings, and threats made when people tried to recover what he owed them. The possibility arose that Hannah had uncovered not just her father's hidden past, but ongoing dealings that placed her in danger in Brookhaven. The once perfect Dawson home now felt cursed. News vans parked outside, neighbors avoided eye contact, and whispers grew louder. The discovery of Hannah's body had transformed speculation into something heavier, something that demanded answers. It was no longer enough to wonder what secret Hannah carried. The urgent question became who killed her to keep it hidden. The search for the figure Hannah called the Shadow led detectives down an unexpected path. As they continued to question those close to the Dawson family, one detail began to surface. Repeated Lee Roberts' brother-in-law. Mark, he had been living quietly in the Dawsons' basement for several months, a presence few neighbors had even been aware of. While most described him as withdrawn and unfriendly, others recalled seeing him late at night outside the Dawson home, smoking on the porch steps or pacing the driveway. At first, his presence seemed unimportant, but as investigators pieced together the timeline of Hannah's final day, Mark began to emerge as more than just a background figure. Detectives discovered that on the night Hannah disappeared, Robert's car had been borrowed by Mark. At the time, this detail had been overlooked, buried in the swirl of confusion, but when reviewed again, it became critical. Mark explained that he had used the car to meet friends, but he could not produce names or locations to back up his story. Even worse, surveillance footage from a gas station near Brookhaven Forest showed the car pulling in around the time Hannah was last seen. Though the driver's face was obscured, Investigators knew it was unlikely to be coincidence. When confronted, Mark's calmness cracked. His story shifted, first claiming he had been driving aimlessly, then insisting he had loaned the car to someone else. H version collapsed under scrutiny. And detectives began to see him less as a relative living under the Dawson roof and more as the shadow Hannah had feared. The journal entries describing her unease with someone close to her home suddenly seemed to point directly at him. Still, motive was unclear. Why would Mark harm his niece? The answer came when detectives looked deeper into his past and uncovered his long connection to Robert. Years earlier, before the Dawson family settled in Brookhaven, Mark and Robert had been partners in schemes that promised investors quick profits but ended in ruin, while Robert managed to slip away and rebuild. Under a new identity, Mark had been left to face the consequences. Though he escaped serious prison time, his reputation was destroyed, and he drifted aimlessly in the years that followed. The bitterness he carried toward Robert was no secret. To him, Robert had rebuilt a perfect life while he was left to rot. This resentment grew sharper once Mark moved into the Dawson household. Investigators learned that money had been a constant source of tension. Mark often pressed Robert for financial help, claiming it was owed for the years of loyalty he had shown during their old schemes. Robert, determined to protect the life he had built, resisted giving more than the minimum. Hannah, sharp-eyed and curious, had noticed the whispered arguments in the basement and had pieced together enough of their shared past to realize the truth. Her journal entries about the shadow reflected not only fear, but also her awareness that Mark was dangerously unpredictable. Detectives began to see the crime not as a random act, but as a desperate attempt to silence the only person who had uncovered everything. Hannah's death was not just about a family secret, but about a man who feared losing the little leverage he had left. Killing her was a way to stop her from exposing Robert, and at the same time, a twisted way of punishing Robert himself. When police searched Mark's belongings, they found scraps of paper filled with notes about Robert's past, newspaper clippings from years earlier, and a small envelope of cash hidden in a toolbox. It was enough to connect him to the scandal and to establish a motive. Witnesses recalled seeing him leave the house on the night Hannah disappeared, wearing a dark jacket and carrying something in his hand. Though the evidence was circumstantial, it drew a line between Mark and the crime that became impossible to ignore. The arrest came quietly, the officers approaching the Dawson home in the early morning. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. As Mark was led out in handcuffs, his expression blank. Robert stood at the doorway, his face drained of color, while Linda wept silently behind him. For many, the sight confirmed what they had suspected all along: the Dawson family was hiding a truth darker than anyone had imagined. Mark's arrest brought a wave of relief to the town, but it did not erase the damage. Brookhaven had watched the Dawson family unravel in slow motion, and the truth that now emerged felt heavier than anyone expected. Detectives pieced together the final sequence of events, creating a picture that was both chilling and heartbreaking. On the night Hannah disappeared, she had confronted Mark in the basement. Investigators believed she had uncovered enough of Robert and Mark's criminal history to feel certain of the truth. And in her youthful determination, she wanted to bring it to light. Mark, terrified that his role would be exposed and consumed by years of resentment toward Robert, lashed out. What began as an argument quickly spiraled into violence. In a moment of panic, he ended Hannah's life and used Robert's car to drive her body into the forest, thinking the shadows of the trees would keep his crime hidden. When presented with the evidence, Mark confessed only in fragments, never giving a full account. He blamed Robert for everything, insisting that if Robert had not abandoned him years earlier, Hannah would never have discovered their past. He described himself as a victim of circumstance, a man cornered into a terrible act, yet his words carried no comfort. The brutality of what he had done could not be softened by excuses. Robert, meanwhile, faced consequences of his own. Though he had not directly killed his daughter, his carefully buried past was now exposed to the public. Every detail of his earlier scams was printed in newspapers. Every person he had deceived years before came forward to remind the community of what kind of man he once was. His reputation as a trusted real estate agent collapsed overnight. Clients cut ties, his business crumbled, and the life he had spent so long creating turned to ash. The very secret he had tried to bury had returned to destroy him, just as Hannah had feared. Linda suffered most visibly. She was forced to stand between the memory of her daughter, the truth about her husband, and the betrayal of her brother. In interviews, she appeared hollow, her voice breaking as she described how the family she once believed unshakable had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. She left the Dawson home soon after Mark's trial began, unable to remain in the place where so much had been lost. Friends later said she rarely spoke Robert's name, as if erasing him could soften the pain. The trial itself drew intense attention. Mark sat stone-faced as prosecutors described his resentment, his history of failure, and the night he silenced the only person who had dared to uncover the truth. The defense tried to paint him as unstable, desperate, and manipulated by Robert, but the jury saw through it. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. For the people of Brookhaven, it was justice, but for the Dawson family, it was only a grim reminder of what had been taken. Hannah's funeral became a moment of reckoning. Hundreds attended, filling the church with flowers and photographs of her smiling face. The service was quiet but heavy, marked by the collective grief of a town that had not been able to protect one of its own. Linda sat alone in the front pew, her hands clutching the photograph of her daughter, while Robert remained a silent figure at the back, unwelcome by many, who now viewed him with suspicion and contempt. In the months that followed, the Dawson name disappeared from the bright suburban image it once carried. The house was sold, the garden left untended, and the warmth that once greeted neighbors vanished. Brookhaven moved on, but the story of Hannah's death lingered in whispers, a reminder of how quickly perfection could collapse. What made the tragedy unforgettable was not only the crime itself, but the warning it carried. Secrets do not remain buried forever. They grow, feeding on silence, until the day they surface with a force no one can control. In the Dawson family, it was not simply greed or anger that destroyed them. It was the weight of lies stacked too high, the refusal to face the past, and the silence that left a girl to carry a burden too heavy for her age. Hannah's journal, later placed in evidence, was returned to her mother after the trial. Linda kept it locked away, a painful record of her daughter's fear and courage. For her, those pages became both a wound and a warning. They told the story of how truth, once uncovered, cannot be hidden again, and how the cost of ignoring it can be devastating. The Dawson family's fall became a lesson carved into the memory of Brookhaven. Behind polished doors and quiet streets, danger can lurk in the shadows of secrecy. And in this case, the secret was powerful enough to tear apart everything, leaving nothing behind but grief, shattered trust, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the secret that kills is the one you try hardest to forget.